Boy, this must be a good group. I'm so happy you're all talking to each other. I want to start the program in case anyone has to run, but I think you could stay all day because we got a really interesting group of people here. Welcome, Larry. He's my buddy. He's so grateful. I'm so grateful that he said he would talk here because I started the Institute and I met Larry 20 some years ago, Larry. And anyway, we have Capote's women, and he goes into the lives of these extraordinary women who were Truman Capote's swans. And I was young enough to go to the hairdresser and see them, at least half of them. One of my friend's mother was one of the swans. But I want to also tell you about Larry. As I said before, he's a wonderful writer. You can read anything. But he had one book. I mean, he wrote one of the Kennedy women. He did Under the Palm at Mar-a-Lago. But one of his books really did something very important to someone else's life. And his book was Under Justice? What was it, Larry? The what? The Price of Justice. The Price of Justice. And it goes into, because tomorrow we're going to be talking about justice with Bill Cook. That book allowed a man who was in jail to be released because the president was the crook, not this guy. And it took his book to free people. So if anyone does good writing, Larry, you certainly have. So will you come up and you can talk and entice everybody. He's the best storyteller I can tell you.
You know, Dale and I go back a long, long time. We're exactly the same age. I'm 80, and she's a month younger than I am. We both grew up in Chicago. We had something else in common when we were very young. We both were obsessed with Roy Rogers. My father was a professor at the University of Chicago, and my mother was a very serious woman. And they knew nothing about Roy Rogers. But when Roy Rogers came to town for down in the arena, my father got a ticket so I could see Roy. Well, we were up. My father's professor and her professor's salary. We were up in the cheap seats, and Roy came in and Trigger, his golden palomino, and walked around, and he shook hands with the kids in the first row. And I said, "Daddy, why doesn't Roy shake hands with me?" And my father said, "Well, you're not in those seats." Well, Dale was in those seats, and Dale was in love with Roy. This is the great love of her life, and she was there, and this was her great moment. And when Roy came in, the tragedy of her life was riding beside her was Dale Evans, the other Dale, his wife, and and Dale has never gotten over this, but she's nonetheless done great things in her life. We're talking here today about Truman Capote. I remember Truman was born in New Orleans. He loved to tell the story of being in a restaurant in New Orleans. This is when he's one of the most famous writer in America, and he's sitting in the restaurant having his meal, and this couple comes over him, and this woman is just in ecstasy. This Truman Capote there, and she says, "Mr. Capote, would you please sign this piece of paper for me?" Well, and she signed it. And her husband was sort of fed up with this. And her husband unzipped his pants and pulled out his business and said, "Sign this." And Truman looked up and said, "There's not enough room for my autograph. I may be able to put one of my initials there." That was Truman. One of the great Americans, we all know In Cold Blood. We all know Breakfast at Tiffany's. We all know the journey of his life. We watched some of the Tonight Show. We all have all these stories about him. What we don't know, a lot of it is what I tell the story in my book, Capote's Women. in 19 I mean he was an incredibly ambitious person, and he watched what Norman Mailer was doing, what these other writers were doing, and he saw that he hadn't written the great book he wanted to write, the masterpiece. And in 1958 he was in this island off of Greece, and he decided he wanted to write a book uh, about like Marcel Proust or Edith Wharton, about the rich in America, an immortal book about their lives, and he was going to base it on these women, these seven rich, beautiful, talented women that he called his swans, and he chose them very carefully. Just because you were beautiful didn't mean you were a swan. Just because you had a lot of money didn't mean you were a swan. You had to have this kind of presentation. And in his thinking, you had to turn yourself, your very presence, into art. So when Babe Paley went into the colony for lunch, and she learned you don't look either side. You don't let anybody know you realize they're looking at you. But you walk in, and people are just awed by your presence. And that was true of all of these women. My, to me, the most interesting is Gloria Guinness. Gloria Guinness was a Mexican woman. When she was 18, she married a Dutch executive in Mexico. That didn't last very long. She came to Paris with no money, and she said, "All you need is one black dress to succeed in life. If you're a beautiful woman, that's what you need." Well, she met this German duke, married him, goes to Germany, has a couple of kids. World War II, her husband goes to fight in the Russian front. She begins an affair with the Nazi spy chief and goes out every night with him to these wild parties. There were wild parties in Berlin at that time. When things got too tough, he arranged for her to go to Spain. She arrives in Spain. She's probably a spy. She's probably a spy for the Nazis. And there she meets the son of the Egyptian ambassador, marries him. That doesn't last very long. She's 40 years old. She's got two kids and doesn't have anything. And she meets Gloria Guinness, who just inherited $200 million, which is, imagine what that would be today. And they married. And he was, like in so many of these marriages, he's the one with the money. So he's the one that controls things and dominated her, totally dominated her. The jewelry was the name of his foundation. When they'd go out to dinner, he would unlock the safe and she put on the jewelry. When they came back at night, the back would go in the safe. She wrote a novel. She wrote a play that was going to be on the West End, and he wouldn't let that be done because he wanted just to have attention to her. She for a while in the '60s wrote a monthly column for Harper's Bazaar about clothing and fashion and her philosophy. It was kind of amazing stuff, but having this man and being in his company, she likely committed suicide in their state in Switzerland when she was in the early '60s, and they had a place in Palm Beach just south of here, an incredible house. Babe Paley. When you think of Babe Paley, we all know Babe Paley. When she marries William F. Paley, he was very disdainful of her. And so we think of her as she was considered the most beautiful woman in the world. But when she was 17, she was in an automobile accident. And her face had to be redone. And she lost her teeth, and she wore false teeth. When she was in a different, she slept in a different room than her husband. When she'd get up in the morning, she would put her teeth in and put her makeup on before she would even see anybody. And she twice, Truman said, she twice tried to commit suicide. So these lives, in some ways I don't like to know what to make of these lives. A couple of years ago, there was an event here with David Patrick Columbia of New York Social Diary, and I asked him afterwards, I said, what is the relationship between money and happiness? And he said, the more money you have, the more unhappy you are. Well, I thought about that, and I thought about bookstores. Jeff Hayner's bookstore should have a special section called "Stories About the Unhappy Rich." It would give much pleasure to people who don't have quite that much money. But I thought, is that true? Are these people unhappy? Are they unhappy because they have money? And then I thought, well, the poor don't think about where they're happy. Now they're getting up and they got to make enough money to pay the rent at the end of the month and to eat something. So they're not thinking about happiness. Who's happy? happiest man in America is this guy who runs a hardware store in Topeka, Kansas. He has two kind of mousy kids, a mousy wife. He goes to the bowling. He was in the bowling on Thursday. He goes to church on Sunday. He's happy. He's happy. If you get money, what do? You're thinking, why am I not happy? Why don't I have more? Why isn't there more pleasure? And that was with these women. They in their generation, they felt the only way to succeed was to marry a rich man. And their whole life was obsessed with that. I mean, Babe Paley's mother, Mrs. Cushing, that was her daughter. Three daughters were groomed in every way to marry three of the richest men in the world. And that's precisely what they did. But it didn't bring them the kind of happiness they thought it would. So this book is kind of, there's a darkness to these stories, and there's no way around it. That's that one afternoon you read these lives and the divorces and the affairs, and you wonder ultimately what did it bring them. I figure in this story in a way in the end, because I was in the 80s, late 1988, I was in L.A. writing a book about Johnny Carson, and I knew Joanne Carson, his ex-wife, and in 1984, Truman had died in her arms in her house above Sunset Boulevard. And when he died, she took his ashes, and she said that Truman said that she was going to keep half the ashes, and the other half were going to go to his longtime lover. Well, I don't believe that. I think Joanne just made that up. And Joanne also said that the famous pages to answered prayers, which you never wrote, were in a lockbox somewhere, and she had the key, but she didn't know where the storage was. In any case, 4 years later, she calls and says, shortly before Truman died, he did this tape for me, so I can do the 1980s counterpart to the famous black and white ball, the ball at the Waldorf, which is the greatest party of the 60s, maybe the 20th century. And she could do that party. And she said, but Larry, you can't come, because if Johnny finds out I'm talking to you, I'm going to lose my alimony. Well, okay. So the party was going to be on Halloween. Halloween morning, Joanne calls and says, Larry, you can come to the party after all. Well, I've had enough last minute invitations to know why you invited last minute. There's an empty seat, right? So, but she said you have to go in costume. So I went to the costume store, and Halloween morning, what's left? The only costume left is the executioner. So I got the executioner with his black hood, the plastic hatchet. My wife wore a pretty mask. We go to the party above Sunset Boulevard, and Joanne has invited every star in Hollywood, but they're not going to show up, because if Johnny finds they're at Joanne's house, they're not going to get the Tonight Show anymore. So there's nobody there. And when I come up, they're sure I'm a star. And they come up and want me to take off my mask. So I won't go. I go in. It's a kind of sad party. There are all these tables set up around the pool with candles. There's nobody there. There's a senile Jim Bacchus, Mr. Magoo, propped up on the sofa, and Esther Williams, and that's it. Well, and People magazine, because Joanne's great dream was to have a story about it in People magazine. The photographer and reporter was there. At midnight, you're supposed to take off your mask, but we had to leave. Obviously, I can't take off my mask. So right before midnight, we left. 5 minutes later, Joanne comes running out and says there's been a theft. Somebody has stolen the ashes, they've stolen the manuscript to answered prayers, and they've stolen her jewelry. And everybody says, we know who the thief is. It's that guy with the executioner. That's who it was. And so next week, there was a story in People magazine about that. And Joanne calls me and says, the thief has returned the ashes. Well, I knew she had made this up, and she totally made it. I said, I'll come over and help you. So we went over, and she said, we have to do something with these ashes. And we got in her sports car, and I've got Truman's ashes, or basically half of Truman's ashes, in my lap. And we're driving all over Los Angeles trying to figure out what should we do with these ashes. And we're talking to Truman. Truman, what do you think? Where should we put your ashes, Truman? What do you want to do? So finally, I remembered at the Westwood Memorial Chapel in Westwood, Marilyn Monroe's ashes are there. So why don't we go there? So we go there, and the mortician comes out, and he finds these mailbox slots, and that's not good for Truman. Then he opens the door, and everybody has a book, but since Truman is an author, it doesn't seem appropriate. And then there's these 36 creps, and Joanne's, and when Marilyn Monroe, and Joanne says that's where we want that's where we want Truman's ashes to go. And the partition, but I'm sorry, but they're all taken. But you see Mr. Peter Lawford's name here. The Kennedys have not paid for this. We are willing to take Mr. Lawford out of there, and we'll give you a special deal, and you can put Mr. Capote in there. So she cut the deal, but she had remember, she had half the ashes, but she couldn't stand to part with half the ashes. So she took half of those and put them in this Japanese box. She added 100% of her dog's ashes and put them in Westwood. So if you go to Westwood now, and it says Truman Capote, and now Joanna's in there, and so then when she died, they auctioned off Joanne's belongings, and they debated about auctioning off Truman's ashes, or a quarter of his ashes, if that would be unseemly. And the auction house said they realized that a few years before, Napoleon's penis had been auctioned off for $4,000. And they decided if they could do that, then why not Truman's ashes? So Truman's ashes were auctioned off for $48,000. And that's where Truman is. Where the rest of him is, I don't know. So let me conclude by reading the last couple paragraphs of my book. What a marvelous piece Truman would have made of this tale. Nothing in life was too bizarre for his scrutiny. If he was sitting over dinner with his swans, he would have regaled them with this business, spinning it out in all kinds of ways. Napoleon's was not the best penis he would ever have seen. Time described it as looking like a maltreated strip of buckskin shoelace, but it had once been attached to the invader of Russia and ruler of half of Europe, and a quarter of Truman's ashes had gone for 15 times the price. Truman understood the myriad ironies of his life better than anyone. He had written 2 books that will live, In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's, but he had not finished his self-described masterpiece, Answered Prayers. Brilliant of mind, merciless in ambition, shrewd in social relations, Truman believed that he could enter the swan's domain and leave with a chef d'oeuvre in his hand. But he got all tangled up in the swan's world and his own personal demons. In the end, Answered Prayers proved to be as much Truman's story as it was the swan's. People bid for Truman's presence in death and bid royally, just as they had in life. As long as people read Truman's books, talk about him, and fight over some measure of his presence, he's still alive, beguiling the world with his stories. Any questions? Huh?
You have a quote that I quote you on all the time. It's about Lee Roswell.
Huh?
And I was just wondering if you would say where it came from. And it is of the 7 deadly sins, jealousy is the only one that gives no pleasure to the sinner.
That was my quote.
That's yours.
Yeah.
It's such a great quote.
Right.
And you used it to describe Lee Roswell.
Well, Lee Roswell was she was just obsessed with Jackie and jealous of Jackie. I mean, it ruined her life. I mean, what did she have? She's married to this Polish prince. She had beautiful homes. She had kids that were great. But, but she didn't, she just so jealous of Jackie, she couldn't live with it. And when Jackie married Onassis, she had had an affair with Onassis, and she was just enraged with her. And Jackie showed what she felt about her sister, and when she died, in her will, she gave Lee nothing. Another thing about these women, it's just a total aside that always troubles me, is to me, one of the great joys in life is having your kids. And these women were lousy mothers. They just to a woman. They just shuttle these kids off. Maybe they have a dinner party, they bring them in, they curtsy and walk off. But wow, I mean, what a waste as far as I'm concerned. Why wouldn't you want your children? Huh? Go ahead.
What happened to Peter Lawford's ashes?
Peter. Well, the Kennedys. You know, the Kennedys are. I've written 3 books about the Kennedys, and the Kennedys never spent any money. Okay, they're all for charity, but it's other people's money, and so they were very frugal. They dumped his ashes at sea. Huh? Pardon? I don't know who, but they're probably on the mantelpiece. Yeah. Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, okay. I, I have a friend, Susan Zirinsky. Did you ever see the movie Broadcast News years ago about this kind of feisty, idealistic reporter and this dumb anchor man? This was based on Susie Zirinsky's life, whose whole life was at CBS. And 3 years ago, she was named the first woman president of CBS News. And I thought, what a great story this was. And I said, I want to tell you, I want to write this book. Well, I would only do it because she's my friend if she cooperated. And while she was thinking about it, I was doing research, and I read a biography of Paley, William F. Paley. And then reading it, I found, gosh, Babe Paley, she's more interesting. Her story is more interesting. So then I started reading about her, and I read about the other swans, and I read about Truman, and answered prayers. And I thought, this was going to be his masterpiece. Why he couldn't do it is unclear. Okay, why he couldn't follow through? And he lied and said he was writing it, and he alienated himself from the swans when he did an article in a story, a short story, a novella basically, in Esquire magazine in November 1976, and. He used these swans' names, and he wrote these very nasty, really ugly stories about these women. It made no sense to do that. Why? These are your friends. I mean, I write about people I know, but I would be careful about it, and I keep my word to them. But he didn't do that, and then they had nothing more to do with him. So I thought, gosh, if he thought this was a great book idea, it's a great book idea for me as nonfiction, and that's when I did it. I did it during the pandemic, and I wrote most of it down here, and all kinds of books are going to come out of the pandemic. But because what else you could do but just sit there and write, right? So I was very limited. I couldn't go to the New York Public Library. I couldn't go to the Library of Congress. So, but it worked out. It worked out. It's gotten the best reviews of my career. I mean, I'll usually get good reviews, but there's always one negative line in a review. They've got to say that. They've got to put that in there. But the New York Times had one negative line, but other than that, at the Wall Street Journal, you name it, just incredible reviews. Huh? Okay, my next subject is Hitchcock's Blondes, and okay, I hope that's a positive laugh. Okay, these 7 women that Hitchcock was obsessed with, the greatest stars of the era, and the making of these films. And I've already met somebody here at this luncheon who knew these women, so I'm double glad I came here today. And I'm already interviewing Kim Novak. She's a great. I'm just starting, so I'll be talking to her. Oh, okay, thank you.